The banquet hall lay in ruin. Candles burned low, their wax dripping like blood onto the velvet cloth. Goblets rolled across the floor, one still spinning. A single chime marked midnight, sharp against the silence. Then screams cut short. The air reeked of wine and smoke, bodies twisting on the marble as if swallowed by shadows. Fire cracked in the hearth, casting the shape of a maid against the wall. She stood motionless, chest heaving, one hand clenched around something unseen. The voice broke the silence. 1849. In a house of privilege, the servants served death. The mansion loomed over the Hungarian countryside like a stone beast, its towers catching the last pale light of winter. Beyond its gates, the land lay hungry, fields stripped bare, peasants whispering of revolution. Inside, velvet curtains and gilded frames masked rot. Hierarchies pressed like iron, nobles dined above, servants bent below. Down in the servants' corridor, Istvan Varga wiped his hands on his coarse trousers. The smell of hay and sweat clung to him. He carried the stables wherever he went. He paused as a sound echoed, a goblet rolling across stone, faint but insistent. Hanna Kovac shuffled past, a basket of linens in her bruised hands. Her eyes stayed lowered, though she saw everything. She whispered, barely breathing, "Do you hear it?" Istvan tilted his head. "I hear chains, from the cellar." But it was more than chains. Whispers rose from the great hall, muffled cries, the scrape of chairs. They moved closer, drawn as if by instinct. Servants crowded the doorway, faces pale, eyes wide. The laughter that had once spilled from the banquet had gone. In its place was silence, silence broken by a cough, wet and sharp, followed by another. "They drank the wine," a cook muttered, wringing his hands. "They're coughing blood." Anna clutched her basket tighter. The mistress screamed a name. "I heard her like she was calling for judgment." Istvan pushed through the throng, peering in. The hall was a battlefield of velvet and glass. Nobles slumped in their chairs, some sprawled on the marble, eyes rolling back. A chandelier flickered above, its crystals throwing fractured light across their faces. "What happened here?" Istvan's voice cracked. A footman whispered, "Bad wine." Another hissed, "Not wine, poison." From the hearth, firelight licked at portraits of long-dead ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to glare down at the chaos. Shadows lengthened across the noble faces writhing on the floor, mouths gasping like fish pulled from water. Anna stepped closer, her timid frame trembling. She spoke so softly it was almost a prayer. "It's judgment." It must be. Rats scratched in the corners, unseen but insistent. The sound filled the silence between spasms of coughing, between the clatter of another goblet slipping from a noble's hand. One servant swore he saw blood drip onto the marble, a dark trail winding toward the servant's feet. Another claimed he heard the countess calling her son's name, though her lips were blue and still. Chains clanked again, louder now, as if something beneath the house was restless. Istvan glanced at Anna. Her hands shook so violently the linens fell to the floor. For the first time she raised her gaze, meeting his eyes. "What do we do?" she asked. He had no answer. The silence after laughter was heavier than any scream. And in that silence the servants knew. The world inside these walls had just changed forever. The clock rewound 20 years, to a summer when the mansion's stones looked brighter, though its foundations were already heavy with secrets. Children's laughter carried faintly through the courtyards, but it was a brittle sound, strained by hierarchy and fear. Erzsébet Horváth was 12, pale-skinned and soft-voiced, the silver locket at her neck clinking whenever she moved. She would hold it in her small fist, whispering lullabies to herself when no one else could hear. Her brother Laszlo, 15, strutted across the gravel paths with a fencing sword, dragging its point to carve lines into the dirt. Tutors praised his posture, his sharpness, the way his voice commanded servants. His arrogance sprouted early, fed by indulgence, and always nearby, unseen unless summoned, was Judith Farkas. 10 years old, a servant's child. Her world was stone floors and cold hands. She carried a rag doll with one eye missing, tucked under her arm when she worked. One morning, Erzsébet's song drifted down the corridor. Aluj, Aluj, Kitsilani. She hummed, rocking herself by the window. Judith lingered in the shadows, listening. Laszlo burst in, sword gleaming. "Still singing to yourself like a peasant girl. You're too old for lullabies." Erzsébet's hand flew to her locket. "At least songs don't draw blood. Blood is power." He jabbed the sword toward her, stopping just short. "One day you'll thank me." Judith shifted nervously. The doll slipped from her arm, thudding softly against the floor. Laszlo's eyes snapped toward her. "Can't you pick it up faster?" "Yes, young master." Her voice was a whisper. Later that week, hunger gnawed at Judith's belly. In the kitchen, she reached for a crust of bread left cooling on the hearth. "Stop." A heavy hand struck her shoulder. The overseer dragged her to the hall. Nobles watched. Ersebet clutched her locket tighter, wide-eyed. The overseer's belt lashed across Judith's back. She did not cry. She bit her lip until it bled. Laszlo smirked. "Thieves deserve worse." Ersebet spoke, trembling. "She's just a child." "Children learn early," Laszlo snapped. "That's why Father trusts me." That night, Judith sat beside her mother's bed. The woman's breath rattled shallow, the weight of endless years of servitude pressing down. "Don't cry, Judith," her mother whispered. "Chains can't hold forever." "One day," her words broke into a cough, blood flecking her lips. Judith pressed the doll to her face, muffling her sobs. When silence fell, it was final. The next morning, she scrubbed floors while nobles toasted above. Her grief was invisible. Ersebet found her alone. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Judith's eyes burned. "Sorry doesn't feed me. Then I'll share." Ersebet pulled a piece of sweetbread from her sleeve, placing it gently in Judith's hand. Judith stared at the locket at Ersebet's neck. "Why do you wear it?" "My mother gave it to me. She said it will remind me who I am." "And who are you?" "Someone who wants to be free," Ersebet said softly. The words lingered, strange and dangerous. Weeks passed. Lessons hardened Laszlo further. His tutors spoke of obedience, loyalty to crown, disdain for peasants. He absorbed every word. In the stables, Istvan once dared to speak of the suffering outside the gates. Laszlo had laughed, fencing sword tapping against the stable door. "They're weak because they were born weak. Like animals, and animals are meant to serve." He caught Judith listening and sneered. "See? Even the rats gather crumbs when the lion eats." That night, Ersebet sang herself to sleep, voice trembling. Judith listened through the walls, mouthing the words silently, turning them into something darker, more enduring. Time did not heal, it sharpened. At 13, Ersebet was told she would be promised to a man twice her age. Her father's decree carried no softness. She wept in her chamber. Laszlo knocked once before entering. "Stop crying. This is what keeps our house strong." "Strong for whom?" "For me. For us." He placed the sword beside her bed like a promise and a threat. Judith overheard it all. Her rag doll clutched so tightly the seams tore. Years later, the memory of that sound, the rip of fabric, the hush of lullabies, the snap of a whip, would linger louder than any sermon. 3 children, bound in the same house, one sang to survive. One endured in silence. One sharpened his cruelty into steel. The seeds of betrayal were already in the soil, waiting for blood to water them. The years turned the children into figures of their own making, youth painted with shadows. Ersebet Horvath was 17 now, still clutching her silver locket, though her eyes had deepened, as if they carried secrets the stone walls could not contain. She lingered near the chapel more than her chamber, humming her lullabies under her breath. Father Benedek often found her there. He was a man who smelled of incense and wine, his hands ink-stained from endless notes in old books. His sermons fed the nobles with scripture, but his whispers to the young were different, half warning, half temptation. "Justice," he once murmured, drawing a cross in the dust on a pew. "Justice is a blade. In the wrong hands, it cuts the innocent. But in the right hands, it frees them." Ersebet tilted her head. "You speak of freedom as if it is possible. Even chains rust," he replied. Meanwhile, Judith Farkas had grown leaner, sharper. Her ragdoll was long gone, but she carried something else. Catalin, a maid with tired eyes and a rosary missing one bead. Catalin was the only one who spoke to her without command. One night, in the laundry, Catalin pressed bread into Judith's palm. "I saved it. For you. You'll be punished if they see. They already punish me." Catalin smiled faintly. "Better I share my sins." Judith clutched her hand, whispering, "You're the only one who sees me." Their bond was forged in quiet corners, in whispered prayers and smuggled crumbs. Yet outside the gates, rumors drifted in like smoke. Whispers of peasants arming, soldiers deserting, a revolution stirring in the east. Ersebet met one of those soldiers by chance. He was no noble. His boots were worn, his hands calloused, but his eyes were alive with fire. "You shouldn't be here," she said breathlessly the first time he caught her humming by the orchard wall. "And yet here I am." He smiled. "Your song led me." Their meetings grew, cloaked in night and secrecy. He spoke of freedom, of villages rising, of burning chains. She listened, torn between duty and desire. "If they find you," she whispered one night, "they'll kill you. Then I'll die free." Her heart twisted at the words she could never say aloud at the dinner table, but shadows lengthened. One winter evening, Laszlo found Judith sneaking food into a basket. Bread, apples, salted meat. "Where are you taking that?" His voice was sharp as the fencing sword still at his side. "To the fields," she admitted. "There are children starving." He struck her before she finished. "Our food is not for peasants." Judith fell, clutching her ribs. Catalin rushed forward, but Laszlo's glare stopped her cold. He dragged Judith into the courtyard. Servants gathered, silent. Erzsébet watched from a balcony, her hand gripping the locket until her knuckles whitened. The lashes fell, 1, 2, 3, tearing cloth and skin. Judith did not scream. She looked upward, her gaze locking with Erzsébet's. There was no plea in her eyes, only fire. That night in the chapel, Father Benedek found Judith kneeling. Blood stained her dress. "They will never stop," he murmured. "Then neither will I." His candlelight flickered. He leaned close, voice low. "There are poisons in the earth, hidden in herbs, in stones. Knowledge the nobles guard, but never fear." Her lips parted. "Poison? Not all sins are sins when weighed against chains." She stared at the altar. "Will heaven forgive?" "Forgiveness," he said, "is a language of the free. The rest of us must make do with survival." Elsewhere, Erzsébet argued with her brother. "You humiliate her, you break her, and for what?" "For order." Laszlo's tone was iron. "Without fear there is chaos. She's human. She's property." He lifted his sword. "And if you dream otherwise, you'll destroy this family." Tears pricked Erzsébet's eyes. "Maybe it deserves to be destroyed." His face hardened. "Then you are no sister of mine." Chains rattled somewhere in the house that night, cellar iron shifting with the cold. The sound threaded through walls, through hearts. 3 young souls bound by blood and servitude stood at the edge of their fates. Faith battled fear. Love clashed with loyalty. And in the silence, seeds of vengeance took root. Snow blanketed the countryside in silence, but inside the Horvath mansion the air burned with fire and wine. Winter of 1847 brought nobles from across the province, silks brushing marble, laughter echoing beneath the painted ceilings. The feast was not only for celebration but for display. Power carved in venison and goblets, control poured into crystal. At the head of the table sat Countess Ilona, the matriarch. Her jeweled serpent ring caught the candlelight with every gesture, its emerald eyes gleaming. Her voice, sharp as steel, carried across the hall. "Let them see how the Horvaths endure, even as peasants starve in the snow." Judith stood in the shadows with a tray, her face pale, her hands tight around its edges. Laszlo's voice cut across the chatter. "You there, come forward." His eyes glittered as he gestured to her. "Tonight you serve the head table." A murmur rose from the servants. This was no honor, it was spectacle. Judith stepped forward, heart pounding. "Hold out your hands," Laszlo commanded. Confused, she obeyed. He took the decanter and poured red wine into her palms until it spilled between her fingers, dripping onto the marble. Gasps erupted from the guests. "Now serve," he ordered. Her arms trembled as she reached for goblets, the wine slipping from her skin. A crimson trail stained the tablecloth. "Clumsy rat," Laszlo spat, striking her across the face. The hall erupted in cruel laughter. Erzsébet flinched, clutching her locket beneath the table, her lips pressed shut. The countess leaned back, serpent ring gleaming. "Teach them early, my son. Fear is their only language." Judith bowed, silent, though her cheek burned. When the feast ended, servants cleared bones and broken glass. Judith lingered in the corridor, unseen, listening. The nobles spoke freely now. Their words soaked in wine. One maid fainted in the snow last winter. They buried her without a stone. A servant's death is like a dog's death, not worth a prayer. Laughter rattled the walls, sharper than any lash. Judith pressed her back against the cold stone. Her breath shivered. She remembered her mother's final cough, the blood on her lips, the silence that followed. Later, in the laundry chamber, Catelyn found her sitting in the dark. They humiliated you again. Judith's voice was low, steady. They drink without fear. She lifted her gaze, fire alive in her eyes. But wine can burn. Catelyn's rosary beads clicked between her fingers. Don't speak such things. They taught me obedience, Judith whispered, her tone like sharpened steel. She stood, wiping the dried wine from her palms as though it were blood. They will taste my silence. Above them, the halls of power glittered on in blindness. Below, in the servants' quarters, vengeance had begun to breathe. Winter thickened into spring, but the mansion's air stayed heavy with rot. Servants walked quieter, nobles barked louder, and every night the chains in the cellar seemed to clank with restless life. Judith moved through the corridors like a shadow. Her cheek still bore the faint mark of Laszlo's hand, though it had healed into something more permanent, resolve. Catelyn stayed close, her rosary missing its beads swinging at her waist. One night in the laundry, she whispered, "If they catch even a word of what you're thinking, they'll hang you by dawn." "They already killed me once," Judith replied softly. She touched the place where her mother had lain long ago. "This time I choose how I die." The plan began in whispers, fragments and stolen moments. The first to be drawn in was Dr. Martin, the physician. He came to the estate often, summoned for noble ailments, gout, fever, sleeplessness born of guilt. He carried glass vials in the pockets of his coat, each clinking like bells of confession. One evening, Judith lingered by the stables as he mounted his horse. "Doctor," she said, voice low. He turned, the candlelight from the hall catching his tired eyes. "What is it, girl?" "You know herbs, stones, things that heal or harm." He hesitated. "Why do you ask?" Her lips barely moved. "Because healing is wasted here. But harm might balance the scales." Martin studied her. He had once believed in medicine, in saving lives. Now, in a land where peasants starved while nobles drank imported wine, his faith was brittle. Finally, he slipped a small packet into her hand. "Arsenic powdered. Too much and it is obvious. Too little and it is useless. Remember this. Silence is the strongest cure." Judith nodded, whispering, "Then silence they shall have." Peter was next. A kitchen boy, no older than 16, with a stutter that made nobles mock him. Yet his eyes followed Judith with unwavering loyalty. She caught him watching her one night as she ground powder with a stone. "You shouldn't see this," she said. He struggled. "I keep watch for you. No one will catch." His hands trembled as he spoke, but his resolve was clear. He became her shadow in the kitchens, slipping into corners, coughing to distract overseers, dropping a spoon at just the right moment to cover her actions. "You owe me nothing," Judith told him once. "You saved me," Peter said, eyes down. "When Laszlo beat me for stuttering, you gave me bread. I don't forget." But the mansion itself held dangers at every turn. One morning, as Judith mixed flour for bread, Countess Ilona entered the kitchen unexpectedly. Her serpent ring tapped the counter as her gaze swept the table. "What is this?" She lifted the flour jar. Judith froze. Arsenic was hidden inside. One wrong tilt and the powder would reveal itself. "It is flour, my lady," Judith said, lowering her eyes. "For the master's bread." Ilona dipped her finger into the jar, lifted a pinch to her lips. Time stopped. "Bitter," she said, then a cruel smile. "The kitchen is filthy." "Clean it." She set the jar down and swept out. Judith's knees gave way as the door closed. Catelyn caught her arm. "You nearly died." "No," Judith whispered. She nearly did. Zofia entered the circle by accident. Erzsébet's maid, she had been raised to silence, to brush hair and button gowns without leaving a mark. But she found letters in Erzsébet's desk, letters from the peasant soldier Erzsébet secretly loved. Words of fire, revolution, longing. When Zofia showed them to Erzsébet, her mistress clutched her locket, trembling. "If Laszlo finds these..." Erzsébet whispered. "He won't," Zofia said. "I will keep them." She hid them in the hollow of an old Bible, her fear mixing with loyalty. But one evening, Laszlo stormed into Erzsébet's chamber. He snatched a folded letter from her desk. "What is this?" His eyes scanned the page, but the soldier's script was too jagged, too unfamiliar. Erzsébet's heart pounded. "It is poetry. From a book." He narrowed his gaze. "You always were a poor liar." She held her locket tight, meeting his stare. "And you always were too proud to read." He threw the letter down and left, muttering of disobedience. Zofia gathered it quickly, hands shaking. Burn them, Erzsébet whispered. No, Zofia replied. I'll guard them. Secrets are safer with servants. They never believe we can hold them. The rituals became almost sacred. At night, Judith whispered lullabies as she ground the arsenic, her voice low and steady. Aluj, aluj, kitsilani. The sound carried through the kitchen like a ghost. She poured the powder into goblets one by one, slow and deliberate, like a priest pouring sacrament. Catelyn watched, clutching her rosary. This is sin. This is prayer, Judith answered. Peter set a candle by the window, their signal of safety. Fare fast, he stammered. Someone's coming. They swept the goblets clean before a steward entered, muttering about firewood. When the man left, Judith exhaled. We lived between heartbeats. One night by the hearth, the flames roared high. Judith sat with Catelyn, Peter, and even Zofia, their faces lit in orange glow. Do you swear silence? Judith asked. Catelyn's beads clicked. I swear, Peter nodded, fists clenched. I swear. Zofia hesitated, glancing toward the stairs where Erzsébet slept. If she knew, she will know nothing, Judith cut in. But if we are caught, she will suffer too. Zofia closed her eyes. Then I swear. Judith reached into the fire with tongs, pulling a coal onto the stone floor. She scattered salt over it, a ritual she half remembered from her mother. Chains, she whispered. Fire, blood. Let them bind us to silence. They touched the coal one by one, burning their fingertips. The mansion creaked with secrets. Servants whispered in corridors, nobles laughed above. But in the kitchens, in the shadows, in the faint clatter of chains beneath the house, something irreversible was brewing. Peter asked once, voice trembling, When? Judith answered without hesitation, When the goblets are fullest, when the fire burns brightest, when their laughter is loudest. Catelyn leaned close, her whisper almost fearful. And then? Judith's eyes gleamed like steel. Then silence will feast. The banquet hall burned with firelight. Chandeliers dripped wax like melting stars. Laughter thundered against the stone walls, a false symphony of comfort. Wine flowed. Silver clinked. Rats scratched behind the wainscoting. Judith moved among them, hands steady, though her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. She poured with grace, lowering goblets before men who never looked at her face. The wine shimmered under the light, red as blood, heavy as fate. Peter lingered at the edge of the room, trembling, a tray in his shaking hands. Zofia stood behind Erzsébet, eyes fixed downward, guarding the letters hidden under her apron. Countess Ilona raised her jeweled hand, serpent ring glinting. To survival, to Horvath blood. May it endure longer than Hungary's chaos. Goblets lifted. The clock struck 8. They drank. For a breath, all was normal. Fire crackled. Laszlo leaned back, smirking. A noblewoman whispered about Parisian fashions. Erzsébet's silver locket gleamed against her pale throat, then one cough. Sharp, jagged, splitting the laughter. Another followed. Wine spilled across linen like spilled blood. The hall fell into silence as a man's face contorted, his veins darkening like ink beneath his skin. He convulsed, chair clattering back. God! Someone shouted. A woman screamed as blood frothed from her lips. Goblets fell. Glass shattered. One by one they collapsed. Writhing, clawing at their throats, the poison searing them from within. Judith stood frozen. The sound was louder than she had imagined. Screams, wood splintering, goblets striking stone. The air thickened with the stench of vomit and blood. She clutched her apron, trembling, her lullaby whispering in her head. Aluj, aluj, kitsilani. But there was no sleep here. Only judgment. Countess Ilona slammed her hand on the table, serpent ring slick with wine and blood. Her voice ripped through the chaos. What have you done, you rat girl? Judith met her eyes for the first time. Her voice was calm, chilling. I served, she said, as you taught me. Ilona staggered, hand clutching her stomach. Rage burning through her eyes even as her body betrayed her. You will choke on your own... Her words cut off as she collapsed. Ring glinting beside her convulsing hand, Laszlo's arrogance dissolved into terror. He stumbled across the hall, clutching his fencing sword but unable to lift it. Help me. Doctor, someone! His voice cracked, the proud air begging like a child. Dr. Martin stood in the corner, silent, his vials hidden in his coat. He did not move. Laszlo's knees buckled. No, I am Horvath blood. His scream choked as he vomited crimson onto the stone. Judith's eyes did not leave him. The boy who once laughed as her mother died now writhed before her like an animal. Ersebet sat frozen in her chair, silver locket clutched tight, her eyes wide with horror. "Stop this," she cried, voice breaking. "Please stop this madness." Her hand reached for Judith's arm, desperate. "It's my family." Judith's lips trembled. For a moment her eyes softened. Then the sound of another noble convulsing filled the hall and the softness turned to steel. "It is mine too," she whispered. In the chaos, Peter tripped, his tray clattering across the floor. Her surviving steward seized him, shouting, "It's him! He brought the cups!" Peter's face drained of blood. No, I... Zofia darted forward, shoving the steward's hand away. "He's just a boy. Leave him!" The steward raised a fist, ready to strike, but then another noble collapsed screaming, blood spraying across the table. He dropped Peter and staggered back in terror. Zofia pulled the boy behind her, whispering, "Stay close. Say nothing." The chandeliers shook as bodies fell against the tables. Plates clattered to the floor, venison mixing with vomit, red wine with redder blood. The air turned thick with the smell of iron and smoke. One noblewoman crawled toward the door, fingers clawing the floorboards. "Help me!" she shrieked, but her body twisted mid-scream. Lifeless, the silence after each scream was worse than the sound itself. Countess Ilona, gasping on the floor, lifted her serpent ring with her last strength, pointing at Judith. "You will burn." Judith knelt beside her, voice low, almost tender. "No," she whispered. "I have already burned." Ilona's eyes widened in hatred, then glassed over. The serpent ring slipped from her hand, clinking softly against the stone. Dr. Martin finally spoke, his voice cutting through the dying moans. "This is no feast," he murmured. "This is judgment." No one answered him. Judith stood among the wreckage, trembling but unbroken. Around her, blood-streaked silver platters. Goblets lay overturned, and the noble family writhed in their final moments. The girl who once stole bread now commanded silence with her very breath. Erzsébet, clutching her locket, looked up at Judith with tears streaming down her face. "Why?" she whispered. "Why must you destroy us all?" Judith met her gaze. Her voice shook, but it did not falter. "Because they taught me obedience, and obedience is death." Laszlo crawled across the floor, sword clattering uselessly beside him. He reached for Erzsébet's dress, his pride broken. "Sister, help me." But Erzsébet could only stare at him, the proud air reduced to a begging shell. Judith watched, her heart pounding. For the first time she saw them all not as lords but as children, crying, choking, begging, and still she did not move. The fire roared in the hearth, louder than screams. Shadows danced across noble portraits glaring from the walls, their painted eyes bearing witness. Blood glistened on silver. Wine shimmered like poisoned holy water. The hall that had once held power now held only silence. Broken bodies and the faint lullaby Judith hummed under her breath. The servant had become executioner. The feast had become a funeral, and in that silence judgment was complete. The mansion stood hushed, its great windows shuttered, the smell of death still clinging to the stone. Crows gathered on the roof, black wings beating against the wind as if carrying away the souls of the fallen. Inside, bloodstains lingered on the banquet floor. No laughter, no music, only silence. Servants whispered of the dead, afraid to even name them. "I still hear them coughing," Anna Kovacs murmured in the scullery. Her hands trembled as she scrubbed goblets. Blood in their throats. Like drowning, Istvan, the stable hand, spat into the hay. They deserved worse. His eyes darted toward the main hall where portraits of ancestors still stared down. But the house is cursed now. No stable can keep beasts safe where men die like that. Children of the household were taken away by distant relatives, their wails echoing as carriages rolled from the estate. A noble guest, half delirious, muttered in bed before succumbing, "The wine, red as the devil's kiss." The Horvath line, once proud, was shattered. Officials arrived days later, boots pounding on stone, whips cracking in the courtyard to silence the crowd of peasants pressing near the gates. A tribunal was called in the county seat. The halls of justice smelled of ink, smoke, and fear. Servants were dragged in one by one. Some were beaten until words spilled. Others remained silent, lips bloodied but unbroken. In the courtroom, chains clinked as Judith and Catelyn were hauled forward. Their wrists bore iron shackles, skin rubbed raw. Judith's head was unbowed. though her eyes were shadowed from sleepless nights. Catelyn clutched her broken rosary with white knuckles. The judge, an old man with a beard yellowed from pipe smoke, stared them down. "You poisoned their bloodline. An ancient family undone by your hand." Judith's voice carried through the chamber, cold and unflinching. "No," she said. "I freed it." A murmur rippled through the court. Some spat at her feet. Others, the peasants crowded in the gallery, sat straighter, eyes alight with something unspoken. Countess Ilona's serpent ring was brought forth on a velvet cloth, glistening even in death. An official held it high. "This was found by the corpse." She pointed to you with her last breath. "The mark of guilt is sealed." Judith stared at the ring. She ruled with that serpent. Let it slither in hell. Beyond the courthouse, peasants gathered at mass, whispering prayers not for the nobles, but for Judith. Candles flickered in cold chapels, shadows of saints flickering across the walls. "She did what we could not," one farmer whispered. "Her hands were ours," said another. But others trembled. "It will bring curses. Blood for blood. God forgive us." Priests spoke cautiously from pulpits. Father Benedict, pale and weary, offered a sermon none forgot. "Sin does not vanish when nobles die. It stains the land, the fields, the air. Yet who among you can condemn her, when you have dreamt of the same fire in your hearts?" The congregation sat in silence, heads bowed, chains of fear tightening around every throat. On the final day, the courtroom was packed. Gersibet sat veiled in black, her locket clutched to her chest. She had survived, though her soul seemed already buried. The judge raised his hand. "For murder by poison, for conspiracy against noble blood, you are sentenced." But Judith's voice cut across him. "I have no regrets." The chamber erupted. Some shouted curses, others prayers. Soldiers beat their pikes on the floor to restore order. Catelyn turned to Judith, whispering through tears, "We will hang. It will hurt." Judith leaned close, her chains rattling. "Then we will hang together. They cannot break silence once it's bound." Ersebet rose, voice shaking. "Mercy. She was a child in this house, raised in cruelty, beaten into silence. Enough!" The judge thundered. Blood must pay blood. His gavel struck. The sentence was death. The prison was damp, the air thick with mold. Judith lay awake her last night, humming a lullaby under her breath. "Aluj, Aluj, Kitsilani." The sound carried down the corridor, servants listening with tears in their eyes. At dawn they were led out, chains heavy, boots crunching frost. Villagers lined the road, silent, watching as the two women passed. Some spat, some crossed themselves, others pressed their hands together in prayer. At the gallows the ropes swung like pendulums. Crows circled overhead. The executioner asked for last words. Catelyn kissed her rosary, whispering, "God forgive me." Judith lifted her chin, eyes sweeping the crowd. "You fed me chains. You fed me silence. Tonight I serve no more." The crowd held its breath. As the noose tightened, she hummed the lullaby one last time, soft and steady, until the rope snapped her breath into silence. Ersebet wept in the shadows, clutching her locket. She whispered to herself, voice trembling, "She freed us, or damned us." The serpent ring lay in the judge's hand, cold and heavy. Some said it glowed red in the dusk light, cursed forever. Chains rattled. Then silence. The Horvath line was broken. The servant's legend began. The decades passed, yet the memory of the poisoned feast lingered like smoke that refused to fade. The Horvath mansion fell into ruin, its windows shattered, its halls echoing only with rats and wind. But the story took root in every village, every tavern, every whispered lullaby. Peasants sang of Judith in low voices around winter fires. Some ballads named her the Maid of Ashes, who turned chains into weapons. Others cursed her as the serpent's bride, who drank the devil's counsel. In one version, she sprinkled the poison with holy water. In another, she kissed each goblet before it killed. At fairs, fiddlers played quick, sharp tunes called the Dance of the Goblets. Children stomped their feet in imitation of nobles writhing in their death throes, until mothers clutched them close and hissed, "Enough, do not mock death." The church struggled to hold the tale. Priests thundered from pulpits. She consorted with Satan. She made chalices into coffins. Do not let her name be sung. Yet in the same pews, mothers hushed crying babes with lullabies once hummed by Judith herself. "Faluch aluch kitsi lani." The melody clung stubbornly to the lips of the poor, sweetened by memory, sharpened by grief. One priest in Pest called her a Magdalene who chose the sword instead of repentance. Another, in secret, admitted to peasants after confession. Perhaps the Lord used her hand where ours were bound. In village taverns, the legend lived not in sermons but in relics. A single silver goblet, rumored to have been carried from the hall, was nailed above a hearth in the market town of Szeged. Blackened at the rim, cracked down one side, it was said to shimmer red under moonlight. Travelers pointed to it and muttered, "Drink from that cup and you drink death." Men swore they saw faces of the poisoned reflected in its curve. Women touched it for luck before childbirth. Children dared each other to kiss it at midnight. Whether it was truly from the Horvath table or not, none could agree. But the tavern keeper smiled as coins clinked, and the legend grew. As for Ersebet, she lived. Grey-haired, veiled in black, she wandered the ruined halls of the family estate until her body could no longer bear it. She never married. She never bore heirs. She clutched her silver locket, speaking to it as if it held the voice of her brother, her mother, her lost soldier. Sometimes children of the village dared approach her garden, where weeds tangled like chains. They heard her muttering, "She freed us, or damned us. I cannot tell." On rare nights she gathered the braver ones close and told fragments of the feast. Never the whole truth, only flashes. The serpent ring, the sound of coughing blood. The maid's eyes calm as steel. Then she would close her locket and whisper, "Never trust silver goblets. They shine too bright to be honest." She died with the locket in her palm. The story spread beyond Hungary. Letters carried it to Vienna, Prague, even Paris. Some papers called it peasant revolt. Others called it witchcraft. The Gazette de Pest wrote, "A servant's hand has unseated a noble line. Poison is cheaper than revolution, and swifter than armies." And so Judith's name twisted with each retelling. To the nobles, she became a monster. Children of the gentry were warned, "Obey your servants kindly or the maid will salt your cup." To the poor, she was a martyr. She drank their laughter, they said, and poured back silence. To some, she was neither demon nor saint. Only a girl who answered cruelty with cruelty, chains with fire, silence with poison. She was a victim. She was an avenger. She was a servant who dared to serve death instead of bread. Judith lived and died in chains, yet her name outlived the Horvaths. And in that outliving she became legend, monster to some, martyr to others, forever both. What is justice and what is vengeance? In the eyes of kings and courts, justice is a gavel, a rope, a decree inked in black. In the eyes of the hungry, justice is bread that never comes. Between these two hung Judith, too low to be remembered as noble, too bold to vanish as nothing. Chains breed rebellion. They do not silence it, they forge it. Every lash on her back, every order barked without mercy. Every death suffered in silence. These were links of iron. When the chain grew too heavy, it broke not in quiet surrender but in fire. They taught her lullabies to soothe. She turned them into hymns of war. The gentle rhythm of sleep became the drumbeat of judgment. And the silence, the silence. That was the heaviest of all. It was silence when her mother died in the fields. Silence when she was beaten in the kitchens. Silence when nobles raised goblets to mock her grief. But when she chose to break that silence, it shattered like glass across stone, cutting everyone who heard it. Some say she was evil. Some say she was justice made flesh. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps vengeance is simply justice denied too long. The poison killed a family. But it was not poison that spread through villages, through songs, through whispers in the marketplace. It was the idea that the powerless could strike back, even if only once. History does not remember the measurements, the powders, the careful grinding of arsenic. History does not remember the flavor of the wine. History remembers the servant who dared to serve death in a silver cup. History does not remember the poison. It remembers who dared to serve it. The hall falls silent. The chains have stopped clinking. The last goblet lies shattered on the stone floor. Now the question is yours. If you were born in chains, if every breath you took was owned by another, if every word you spoke risked a lash across your back, what would you choose? Would you kneel, bowing deeper with every command until your very soul bent beyond repair? Or would you rise trembling but unbroken and serve the cup that could end it all? This is not just Judith's story. It is the story of the voiceless, the beaten, the forgotten. It is the story of silence turned sharp, and it asks you, how far would you go for freedom? Would you forgive or would you burn it all down? Fade to black. If this story gripped you, if it forced you to wrestle with the weight of justice and vengeance, then step deeper into history's shadows with us. Subscribe to the channel, give this story a like, and share it with others who crave the untold, the forbidden, the silenced. Leave a comment below. Was Judith a monster, or was she the justice her world demanded? Your voice continues the legend.